like I can't even believe the world we live in these days. It's frightening to think that it could get worse than this. Like it's like there is no longer like political differences. You're either a friend or an enemy today. And this is precisely because of social media, information age. It's a big, huge experiment. And I just think it's very, very dangerous. And
welcome to the Rose Show podcast.
So you see in the commercial, everything is growing, nature, it's growing wildly, vines, grass, everything. It's just completely out of control, And then all of a sudden the garage door opens and a guy with a chainsaw is there, and the guy with the chainsaw, he's like, order. I am the orderer. I will impose order on this chaotic natural system that's gone crazy, Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I have the pleasure of being here with Randall Schweller. He is a top scholar in international relations and founder of Neoclassical Realism. And he's well known for his grand theorist of international relations. He is a top professor at Ohio State University in the Department of Political Science. And he's a director for the program of the study of realist foreign policy. He's also written countless books, and one of my favorites, Maxwell's Demon and the Golden Apple, Global Discord, and the New Millennium. So how you doing today, Randy?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to have you here and talk about all the uncertainty, unpredictability, and chaos we have in the world that's only grown since your great book in 2014. So let's begin. Randy, can I call you Randy?
You can call me whatever you like. So Randy.
Perfect. Randy, we'll call you Randy.
Whatever.
Or Professor. Should I call you Professor?
No, Randy.
Randy, you got it.
Yeah.
Tell us about your background and how you came to creating neoclassical realism.
Well, I went to Columbia University as a grad student in 1986, actually. And I had been a musician. So I actually had another career before I entered grad school. And at the time, I didn't really know what a great place Columbia University was for international relations. It was like one of the meccas, if not the mecca, and particularly because my mentor, Robert Jervis, was there, along with Jack Snyder and all kinds of, greats. Even William T.R. Fox was still there. He invented the term superpower way back in 1946. And, you wouldn't think you're sitting next to the man that actually invented the term superpower.
Wow.
Okay, he wrote a book called The Superpowers in 1946, but it was Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union. So Britain, we'll come back to that. And this might, I think we'll probably come back to this. But anyway, it was a great school, but it had a realist orientation, but also a psychology orientation. So it was a sort of a strange marriage between realism and psychology, political psychology. And I actually gravitated to the political psychology, which was not a good choice in grad school. It's like that thing where you love it, but it doesn't love you back. And it wasn't. I tell my grad students all the time, you have to find your voice in scholarship. Just like anything, as a writer, as a musician, whatever you are, you have to find your voice. And, you could be, depending on what you choose to focus your energies on, you could be very successful or completely fail. And then the margin of error is very small. So as a grad student, I was a psychology type, but then when I finished doing graduate courses and did my general exams, passed them, then you have to write a dissertation. So you go from being a consumer of international relations to being a producer. And I figured out that I should do structural realism, which is, for those, most of you will not know anything about international relations. So let me just say it's the oldest perspective in international relations, theoretical perspective. It goes back to Thucydides, and you think of people like Machiavelli and Hobbes. It's kind of a very down and dirty way of looking at the world. I mean, I kind of, the term realism, in a way, it's offensive, I can imagine, to many people who are, even though it's the oldest, most distinguished theoretical perspective in the field, there are far fewer realists than there are liberal types. It's not the same meaning as liberal and domestic, but it's what this country is. So we've had a liberal foreign policy of promoting democracy and human rights, and these ideas of natural harmony of interest in the world, and we like interdependence. These are all very liberal ideas. Realism is one of those theories that I think all other theories, it's the springboard for everything. And it's a very simple, brutal look at the world. But I think the title might be offensive, because it sounds like, if I'm a realist, then what are you? You must be an idealist, a naive, woolly-headed thinker. Well, it really is three things that make a realist. I say, like, to have a realist worldview, you have to, they're dark, pessimistic, and paranoid, which doesn't sound very attractive, but it's like a view of the world, first of all, where power realities are the central driving force of thinking about international politics. I mean, like, today we would think of Kissinger, by the way, like Henry Kissinger was really the last big time realist, that one of the only realists that's ever had been the driving force of American foreign policy. So this is kind of, it probably sounds very foreign, very European to your listeners if they're listening. Let me explain. Like, so when I say dark, the dark part of it is that for realists, there's this concept, the structure of international politics is the key. And this may be a little abstract, but it's not, it's really tinker toys if you think about it. Anarchy. Anarchy means there is no sovereign arbiter to make and enforce agreements among states, which sounds like a big deal, but let me just say, all it means is there's no world government. There's no 911 you can call if you're some state and you're in trouble. There's nobody to call. So what it means is that the international system is a self-help system. If you survive and thrive, it has to be because of your own arrangements that you make. It's a self-help. It's the means that you provide for your own security, whether that's making alliances or building arms. You have to do it. It's not guaranteed. So in that sense, because it's a self-help system, all states strive to be as powerful and secure as they can be. So they seek power and security. Because you say, well, how much power do you need? Well, I don't know, because I don't know who's going to be against me. And this is the second part, pessimistic. Well, let me see. Okay, well, the pessimistic part is that realists don't believe in progress. You see, and like, that's not very American to say that. Americans are can-do people. They believe in, Woodrow Wilson, we're going to have world peace and democracies will reign and the world will all get together and eat, granola bars in a field and, get along and, but realists don't believe in a natural harmony of interest. It's all about the idea is that we can never that we all seek the same things, but we can't share them. This is very important. And I think you're like an economist. I get the feeling, because I watch one of you saying, like, so you understand this concept, and your viewers will understand this idea of scarcity. This is very important. Like, if the fact that the world is built on social and material scarcity, like, we can't all have prestige and status, because if everyone has it, nobody has it.
Then there's really no value.
We can't all have security. We can't all have power. We can't all be powerful. So this drives this sort of pessimism that, that we have to seek power, and we have to seek, in a sense, primacy, because that's the whole point of politics. When you think, like, sometimes people say, well, what is politics? The most simple thing is, from a realist point of view, politics is about who gets what, when, where, and with what consequences. Because we live in a world of scarcity. If there was no scarcity, everything was plentiful, you could get whatever you wanted, there'd be no politics. So realism is pessimistic, but it's political. It's pessimistic in the sense that we can never create a perfect world of harmony.
Absolutely.
And then finally, I'll just make this point quickly, and then I know it might be, but it's that realists are paranoid, because, like, I was getting back to that point about how much power and security do you need? How much prestige? Well, I don't know, because realists say you can never know what a state's intentions are going to be, what they are, or what they'll be in the future. So if you ask how much power do you need, well, I don't know who's going to be lined up against me 10 years from now, or what people are, what leaders, what states are thinking today. So I'm paranoid. I'm always paranoid. I'm always thinking worst case scenario, because you can't measure others' intentions, but you can measure their capabilities. So you assume the worst. And so all of this means that the bottom line is, like, even if all you want is security, and everybody, all they want is security, they don't seek anything other than that. They're not revisionists. They don't want to conquer the world or a large portion of it. We can't all be secure, according to realists. It's like the means to make myself secure in an anarchic self-help world, I have to build arms and form alliances. But when I build arms, I'm making you less secure. So there's like that zero-sum relative gains aspect or orientation to realism. It's like, I want to do just one thing and make myself more secure, but I can't do that without making you less secure. So it's kind of like a tragedy. There's both tragedy and evil in realism. I mean, but the point is, you don't need evil in an anarchic world to get war or outcomes that people don't want. It's that for a realist, anarchy and the structure of international relations produce perverse effects, so that they produce like unintended consequences, so that nobody may intend to go to war, and war can still happen, like World War I, for example. People use that as an example. Or like people say, well, nobody wants nuclear war. Well, maybe not, but that doesn't mean we won't get it, because of the perverse effects of units or states co-acting under conditions of anarchy. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but it's a necessary answer. So that kind of pessimistic view, which I want to underscore, is not the dominant view in the field. Most are liberals, and many are now what we call social constructivists. Realism is like the simplest theory. It just says states seek power and security because they live in a self-help world under anarchy. And unless there's a world government, which there never will be, and we wouldn't want even if we could construct one, states, there's this saying that Thucydides said, the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. And it's a brutal kind of reality, but it is the reality. Like, do I want the US to be the dominant state in the world? Of course I do. I'm an American. If I'm Japanese, I want them to be the dominant state in the world, right? If you're Russian or Chinese, you want China to be, if you're Chinese, you want China to be the dominant. Everyone wants primacy, in other words, because that's what politics is about. If they didn't, well, we wouldn't be talking politics.
Absolutely. So many excellent points there. I actually find realism quite refreshing, because I tend to be a realist and I like to know what things are. And it's not just a make-believe illusion world of what we hope, but we, like you said, you expect the worst, but you hope for the best. But, you're a skeptic, you question, and you don't just accept things. And I guess someone could say it's paranoid, but or pessimistic, but I think it's realist in a clearer sense. And I think your discussion of what you just said we admire your realism and just giving it to us the way it is, like a true New Yorker.
Yeah,
So,
New Yorkers should get this. Really.
exactly. So, being based in economics, behavioral and applied, we all know that there's many moving parts in the economic systems of the world, as well as politics, and they're always in a state of flux, and they're always moving. And like you said, power is a zero-sum game. As one, gains a little bit, the other loses, and it's just always in this dynamic state. And there's a lot of risk out there, so it makes sense to, maybe be slightly, I guess, paranoid, but depending on where you live, because of course, like, we want America to be the hegemon, right? The main leader in the world. But at the same time, when you're in a little Madagascar or these other little, sovereign states, I guess we call it a world of sovereign states. They feel the same way, but I think they pretty much, the realist view is they're probably not going to be,
They're not,
and
right.
they're not, and so they just have to accept it. You talked upon security. Security obviously is number one, as family, as being a mom, security for my family, and then security is our group. People in general just want security. And you mentioned an excellent term, which is going to be a big topic we're going to discuss today, which is entropy. And I hope I pronounce it right, but you said it, entropy. And, I think what we could go right into is, because you use that word, and I think it's important that we explain it so everyone can understand exactly how you use entropy as a metaphor in international relations.
Yeah, so entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, and it really, in a technical, like physical, in a science, natural science way, it's really about disorder in a closed system. So it says that in closed systems, they tend towards entropy, which means unusable energy. There are two kinds of energy. There's energy that can be used for work and energy that can't. So in a maximum entropy system, nothing happens. It's just like enervated. There's nothing going on. But in a more colloquial, this term is so elastic. It's been borrowed by everyone, even English criticism, and art history even. But it kind of means disorder. And the way I think of it is, and it took me a long time, it's such an easy concept, and yet in some ways, and then in other ways, it's really hard to get your head around it, because it means a lot of things that all go together. So I think what entropy means is maximum disorder. It means that things tend, it's nature's. So when we think of time's arrow, let's think of history, just how history moves. If we think of time's arrow as a metaphor, that means liberals think this way. They think that time is going somewhere. History has a direction, which we call teleological. History is teleological in the sense that, like, we've heard Francis Fukuyama in the late 80s said, the end of history. So we've reached the end of history. And what is that? Well, it's liberal democracy. That's what he said at the time. And, we had won the Cold War. There was nothing left to fight for, no ideological battles left. And it was like he was saying, well, ideas, it's the concussion of ideas that move history, but it moves history forward. So history has direction, it's going someplace. Realists tend to think of history moving in cycles. So it goes from order to disorder, hegemonic sort of rise and fall of the great powers, which was a Paul Kennedy book, actually, that people were buying in the late 80s. It's unbelievable, became like a coffee table book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. That kind of describes a realist cyclical direction, not linear upwards, but nature's arrow. I couldn't figure out, like, so what is entropy? Entropy is nature's arrow, or time's arrow, which means that things constantly tend towards disorder over time. They're not going, it's going in a direction, but not a progressive one. And I'll give you an example. So here's an example. I was once watching a commercial for this this commercial was for some kind of strange, like Swedish lawn and garden like stuff, and you know how to keep your lawn and gardens manicured, ordered, you know, looking good, temp. So you see in the commercial, everything is growing, nature, it's growing wildly, vines, grass, everything. It's just completely out of control, you know? And then all of a sudden the garage door opens and a guy with a chainsaw is there, you know? With this, and the guy with the chainsaw, he's like, order. I am the orderer. I will impose order on this chaotic natural system that's gone crazy, you know? And you know, everyone's had the neighbor that doesn't mow the lawn, doesn't do anything with their lawn, you know, and you're like, could you please impose some order? You know, I don't say that, I'm not that grumpy, but people do, right? And so you think of entropy is like nature without the order, you know, it's like it just gets chaotic, but it's much more than that. So in a mathematical sense, entropy means the mean. And as an economist, you all understand, it's like, let me give you an example, another way of thinking about entropy. So if I had like 30 dice and I told you that the number, I laid them all out and I said that the number when you added it up was 30. And I asked you, okay, so what do the dice look like? They look like ones, right? They have to be all ones, perfectly ordered. If I told you the dice number was 180 was the sum, we'd say, oh, they're all on 6, right? So that's perfect order. Now, if I roll the dice and I keep putting them back in order, at some point it's going to get totally disordered and it's going to go to the mean, you know, which is the most common. What it means is it's the most obvious, statistically probable outcome is the mean, right? So that's another way of thinking of entropy. It's the most probable outcome if you just let things randomly, you know, random chance, right? So it's you're going to see in nature what is most likely that you're going to see, the most probable thing, right? And another way to think of entropy is like you might have two let's say containers, one of blue, one of yellow, and you have a valve in between, and you open the valve. Over time, the yellow and blue will become green, and then you can't get them back. Once you've lost yellow and blue, you'll never get the green molecule, you'll never get the blue and the yellow molecules to separate and get green and blue and yellow again. So green is like entropy. It's that mixture you lose. So entropy also means like a homogenization, a sort of loss of choice or variety. So all these things are entropy. So in international relations, to me, entropy is it's disorder. And by the way, I just want to say I have a triumph because last week in the Wall Street Journal, they did a piece on Henry Kissinger because he's 100. And he says, what Henry Kissinger sees when he looks at the world today is, quote, disorder. See, disorder. So I feel like I said this 13 years ago.
You did.
But you see, it's in international relations, what I see is that there's a lack of constraint. So the actors in international relations are not constrained anymore the way they used to be, so that anything is possible. That's kind of what I'm getting at. But then the question becomes, why? And that's, I can give you the long-winded answer.
That was my next question. I had actually have a few questions in line here, but I just want to add, before you get to that, I just want to say it's like throwing a tumbler of water out into the sea, and then you can't get that tumbler of water back. And it's like
or like an egg cracking, an egg rolling off a table. You can't put the egg back together again once it's cracked.
Exactly. I love those that excellent examples. And you know, I had quite a few questions regarding this, but I think why don't you just continue with the challenges and what we're witnessing right now with the disorder.
Key, I think, is why. You know, why now? Why? And what I say, it's because a lot is the information age. So going back to just your question about why am I, you know, a realist, neoclassical realism, neoclassical realism isn't that important, although it says that Fareed Zakaria, people will know Fareed Zakaria from CNN. He and I sort of were the original people who did neoclassical realism. That's another thing, though. We can get into that later, but it will just sort of sidetrack this conversation, so I'll let it go. But what was I gonna say? Okay. So the realist aspect of it is that I felt like realism after graduate school. I was thinking, well, we've had this big thing, the digital revolution, the information age, and like realists were not talking about this at all. They had not incorporated it, and so I'm thinking, if Napoleon woke up from his grave and read some of the realist books that were being written, not that they were bad books, but he would recognize the world and think nothing's changed since he died, and a lot has changed. In fact, the digital or information revolution is as big as the industrial revolution and the nuclear revolution. It's huge. So I was in this book, it started because I wanted to talk about why, the impetus, why I did wrote this. Because there was an editor at the National Interest, which I don't know if your viewers would know, but the National Interest is like foreign affairs. It's like you could get it at airports. It would be about foreign relations, but written more for journalists. It's not about theory per se. And this kind of popular journal, the editor was a young woman, Justine Rosenthal, who actually graduated from Columbia like a decade or so after I did. And she had put together this interesting series that was like, she had invited very good people. That's why I agreed to participate when she invited me, called The First Draft of History, which is a very interesting idea because she said, I want you to think about, you're in the year 2050, what would you be looking back at the time, it was 2009, and saying, boy, they didn't get that at all. They didn't see this coming at all, So it was like a think piece or like a thought kind of experiment. And most people played it very safe. I was surprised. And I said, I'm not going to play it safe. I'm going to say, what in 2050 would we look back and think about? And I thought, okay, so the digital revolution, what is this causing to happen in international relations? What do I see? And so I really started to muse about this, or think hard. And that's when I started thinking about entropy. I actually was thinking about, of all people, I don't know if your viewers are, Thomas Pynchon, The Crying of Lot 49. It's a great book. It was written in 1966. It's really a masterpiece. And he thinks in sort of paranoid, huge historical, multi-century kind of like conspiracies using the mail system of all things. Like imagine such everything is not what it appears is the key. So I was thinking like that, and and he likes this concept of entropy. So I was thinking, well, what does the digital revolution, how is that changing things? And it appeared to me that there were two things that were happening for a realist that should concern a realist that we have not even considered. The first was more actors. Like the fact that we have an information age means that there are many more power centers in the world, because what it does is it allows like groups like ISIS or, the flow, international flow of capital, you'll see capital and information allows smaller actors to punch above their weight, so that you get lots of actors like Twitter. Think about how Twitter has influenced and American politics. If you believe in Twittergate, think of like social media, how much this has changed our politics. It's huge. Like that's the other second part of the book, the sort of
and our borders have changed as well. It's no longer country borders. If it's an ideology, it's people with the information age, people across all countries and borders share same thinking. So it's different kind of construct.
Much easier to form transnational identities.
Yes.
Or things like that. I mean, just think like how easy it is to create your own personal world these days. Like you can believe whatever you want. Any
Truthiness, right?
fact you want, you can find on the internet. You can find people to back up your facts, your world. So it's, like if you're looking for somebody, in the old days, if you're looking for someone that believed the world was flat, you'd have to knock on doors. You wouldn't have very good luck. But if you put it up on the internet now, you'll find, you have a whole crowd out there.
Just tweet it. Just go and tweet it.
Right. So anyway, the first structural point was there were many, many more actors that had significance that could, I say, they couldn't really exert power in terms of like a positive way. They couldn't construct anything, but they could destroy things. You think about the Arab Spring, like you have cell phones. So you could get, they called it crowd power or square power, like people power. You could get people to tear down a government. Okay, that's great. But you can't get, what after you've torn down the government? Who's going to build it? That's much more difficult. So I was saying like negative power, really, because the power to like destroy things, to block, to disarm, to do that increase. So you had a lot of actors that can do that. So lots of power centers. So it's like hurting. So like when you think of the world and order is usually imposed by a hegemon, one great power. But now a hegemon, it's like Gulliver tied down by Lilliputians because you can't do anything. You have all these actors that are thwarting your designs, So in that sense, it's like herding cats, a few cats maybe, but when you have dozens of them, it's impossible. So being an orderer in this world with multiple power centers is very difficult. The second thing, that's sort of the structural view of the international system. But the system is also composed of a process. Like you think of systems as having a structure, like who are the important actors, and then a process part, which is how are these actors interconnected? How tightly, like we might call it dynamic density or Durkheimian density. So how tightly coupled are the actors? And you see today, because of the internet and the information age, tightly coupled actors. So that like anything that happens in one part of the system reverberates all through the system. So like think of the pandemic, right? I mean, the original thought, well, I didn't think, but the government was telling us that somebody ate a bat in, Wuhan, right? And then look at how much damage that did. I'm like, my gosh, I wish they hadn't eaten that bat, Now, if that were true, right? You see, it's just that tightly coupled system means that, outcomes are so difficult to predict. There's so much randomness. The system is so tightly coupled, it becomes like what we call an enormously complex, tightly coupled systems. In those systems, there was a book by someone you might know, Perot. Called Normal Accidents. It was like when you have tightly coupled systems, accidents are going to happen. It's just because there's no way to predict how they're going to react. There's so many nodes and interconnection. Nobody knows. It was like the first financial crisis. Nobody understood it. Nobody knew how to stop. Prevent it. Nobody knew what those things were. Those whatever they were called, derivatives. I don't know. So. This is like, so when you have a tightly coupled system that's very interconnected, I don't want to say interdependent because we can get into that later, because interdependence means something different. It means mutual dependence, but I just mean interconnected. And you have multiple power centers, then that is a recipe for disorder. That's a recipe for like, nobody can control anything. It's like out of our hands. The system, it's like on autopilot. So that's what I was trying to say is that international, so people might say, well, yeah, but the US was a unipole at the time. It was a unipolar world, and the US was true. The US is the most powerful in terms of relative capabilities. The US remains, and was even more before China's rise, the most dominant power on the face of the earth. Nobody ever thought you could have so much concentrated capabilities in the hands of one state. And yet it doesn't matter. Capabilities do not translate into influence or power as influence, because power is the ability to get others to do things they otherwise wouldn't do. So it's influence, right? And if you're the only superpower in the world, sure, you can do whatever you want, right? But so can everyone else. Like, the reason so much power during the Cold War is because our allies needed us for security. So we're all pulling, and we could use that to get them to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. We'd say, well, we're providing your security. We're doing this for, when you don't have that anymore, it's like, sure, we can do whatever we want, any foolish thing we want, like try to democratize the Middle East. All right, good luck with that, like we did a lot of stupid things that we wouldn't have been able to do if we were constrained by another superpower like the Soviet Union. But we couldn't get anyone to follow us. It's like being a leader marching down the street, like you're leading and you look behind, there's no followers, that's kind of the problem. It's like the paradox of power. So anyway,
love that. The paradox.
That, we're living in a world without an order. So order is on autopilot, and it's and then there's this thing about hegemonic wars, which we can go into.
Yes,
later.
that's what I was going to go. Actually, I was going to go into that now because you're bringing up the hegemon and you're talking about, and I know in your book, you made a clear distinction. I love that, how hegemonic wars are needed in order to have this period of peacefulness or some, order, some kind of order. And you talk about post 1945, US was now anointed as a hegemon so then next question from that, you can add to that as well, is, are we headed towards maximum entropy? Is that where everything leads to, that we're going to have to get to the point where we have some type of hegemonic war in order to restore some type of order?
Right. So yeah, let's go.
And where are we in the cycle of that?
Right. This is good. So this is the age of descent part. I've written a book, but I haven't, it's a manuscript and I'm still working on it, but
we're excited.
It's all about this point. It's about this. I would say, to preface it, I call it the age of descent. So let's start from the beginning there. So it's funny thing about international relations, when we think of maximum order, or maximum order means maximum neg entropy, the opposite of entropy is order, right? It usually comes after these horrific titanic wars, like the Napoleonic War that went on for 20 some odd years. The First and Second World War, the Second World War ended, the First World War was not, it was part of a hegemonic war, but it didn't end definitively. Whereas the Second World War, we carved up Germany. It was the problem, right? And then we had the US. So these terrible hegemonic wars seem to be the only way to create order, international order. And let me explain that. Peace and prosperity. Why? Because let's go to, why did these wars start? It's like a cycle. So here I agree, realism, there is a cycle to realism. And normally we wouldn't have entropy, but we get it, but we solve it. Okay, so it's not like this problem is new. It's just that we normally get entropy and we solve it, as you suggest, through these hegemonic wars. Now, why? Because let's take the story after the hegemonic war. So let's think about, after a hegemonic war, what does a hegemonic war do? These titanic struggles that are worldwide, great power wars, where all means are used. There's no, it's total war, so meaning total war, everything goes. Okay, so what happens? What do they do? Well, first of all, they crown a new king. It doesn't mean, it's the main antagonist of the war. It's usually somebody, a strong power on the sidelines, like Britain, who is not in the main theater of the war. That's why they're not devastated. Everyone's devastated by this long titanic war. And then there's somebody on the sidelines, usually an insular great power like Britain, and then the United States, that participates in the war, but largely is unscathed by it. And they're a naval power, so they have global reach, okay? So it crowns a new king, which is good. Why? Why is this good? Because it clarifies the bargaining situation. Why do wars start? because there are lots of, there are reasons why wars start. Ideologies, something racial superiority, like, the Aryans, the Nazis, whatever their reasons were. That leave those aside. What's really happening is that somebody has misestimated their power. Like somebody thinks they're stronger than they actually are. Like we don't agree about who's powerful and who's not, because if we agreed, we would just make a deal and we would avoid the costs of going to war. Why should we go to war if we already know who's going to win, right? So somebody misestimated. They didn't understand that they weren't as powerful as they thought, the losers, right? So it's really a confusion about who has power and who doesn't that really is at the bottom of these titanic great power hegemonic wars. At the end of the war, it's clear who has power.
Mm-hmm.
There's one state left standing that is far stronger than everyone else. So they all say, okay, you're the power, you're the hegemon. And then what else does it do? Well, it says it crowns him king, it clarifies the bargaining situation, and the hegemon then has a mandate, a legitimate authority to create its order, its vision, So, and it has not only the vision and the clear mandate and authority. Authority is merely a word for legitimate power, so it has the legitimacy. But also it has the capability to do it. So it has the will, it's capable, it's able and willing to create an international order. It doesn't have to do it. It could just go home, which is what the US did after World War I. We could have been the hegemon, but we just went home because we were like back to normalcy. And then what happened? The 30 years, we had the Great Depression, we had the rise of Nazism, in Japan, and all these terrible things happened because we weren't leading the world. We just left it to its own, design. So we went home. So you don't have to run the world, but you could run. And they usually choose to run the world and in their own design. So they impose order on them. And the other thing that the hegemonic war does is it creates a tabula rasa. Like it wipes the institutional slate clean. It's just, everything is destroyed. We don't want to build on top of old architecture, international architecture. We want clean, a clean slate. So it's much easier to do that. And the hegemon has the power to, and the wealth to absorb the startup costs of creating this international order, which, usually is somewhat institutionalized. So anyway, so now, most of the world is, desperate for reconstruction, like after World War II. They want a leader. The only thing they fear, they want the US to come in with the Marshall Plan, whatever, to reconstruct them. But like you say, well, what does the hegemon get? Well, it gets, its own order and its own, and it also gets, a sort of like insurance policy, but this isn't necessary for this discussion. So, okay, so where are we today? So where does entropy come in? So you have this order, right? But over time, power always is diffusing. So there are always shifts in power. It's like the law of international politics, that power is always shifting. It's always
dynamic, it's in
yeah,
flux.
it's dynamic. So you're going to have rising powers. Like you can think of the post-war world as artificial in a sense, because the hegemon is artificially exalted to this place. It understands that the rest of the world's going to catch up, and it wants the rest of the world to revitalize and narrow that gap in power between itself and the rest of the world, because it's actually somewhat good. You don't want everyone ravaged by war. You can't sell anything. So so over time you get shifts in power and power diffuses, but the institutions and everything that was created in this international architecture no longer reflects the actual power distribution. So after the war perfectly reflects the power distribution, but over time it won't reflect it. So there'll be like a what do you call it? A gap in prestige Prestige would be the reputation for power and actual power. And this is what you see today with China. China's like, they've been demanding their place at the table. They don't think they're getting what they deserve because this international system, all the architecture was created before they were China. They were a weak state. They're saying, well, we want to, our place at the table commensurate with our new power that we have, right? So this is where you get the revisionist states, the rising powers become revisionist states, and they start destabilizing the system. So over time, this perfect, harmonious, ordered system that's peaceful and productive and peaceful. Over time, other power starts diffusing throughout the system. Power is less concentrated, becomes deconcentrated. And the other powers that are rising want more representation in the international architecture, and they just want more. They want more territory, they want more, whatever they want. It's like what China is saying now. We want more. We have prestige demands. We don't want you in the East Asia anymore. We don't, they say that. I don't actually think they mean it. But, it's like, it's they want to impose their Monroe Doctrine because they're China after all, they're a big power now. So over time, you get disequilibrium. You could call this, so this is rising entropy. You get rising disorder over time. And normally this would lead to so the system is the order is less and less legitimate because it doesn't reflect the actual power. And so these rising powers demand, change, which you're not going to get peacefully. You could give it to them, but, normally that's not the way power works. The established don't just give up their power and their rights and their influence to rising powers. Say, oh, you can have it now. So normally you would get a great power, another hegemonic war, and the cycle would, that's how the cycle works. So this rising disorder or rising entropy is solved by another hegemonic war. It's usually every 100 years. It's just turned out like every 100 years we seem to get these great power wars that destroy the order and a new order is put in place. And so that's how it's happening. Now, what's today? Well, we can't get that today. There's no way you can get a hegemonic war when you have nuclear weapons, with weapons of mass destruction. There's no way any rational leader is going to choose hegemonic war, whereas the destructiveness of war has made it an irrational option, great power war. And also, peace has been enormously prosperous. So that's another thing. It's that peace has been so prosperous in the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century going into now, that, again, why would you choose great power war? Everyone will lose, which is what liberals actually back in World War I said, that, war was an illusion. You could never wage war and gain anything by it. The world was quite interdependent prior to World War I, but it didn't stop anyone from going to war, in the end. But it didn't mean it was a foolish idea. So the combination of the destructiveness of war, great power war, and the benefits of peace mean that we're probably not going to have another hegemonic war, which means there's no antidote to rising entropy. So the price of all this, and I don't think it's the steepest price, I'd much rather have rising disorder and chaos and randomness in international politics than another hegemonic war that destroys the world. We just can't have it. But that is the price. And so that's why Kissinger would say, he looks at the world, what does he see? Rising disorder. Because we're just not going to have an order or an ordered world. Now, maybe, I don't know, maybe I've tried to think of something that could substitute for hegemonic war, but I haven't come up with it.
Well, that's a good thing to hear. That's good to know. But yeah, because we're coming upon that 100-year soon.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's why I say it's the age of descent. So to get to that, so where are we in the cycle? We're at the point in the cycle where the order has been delegitimized. And you see that. And prior to writing the book, when I was writing the book, nobody was talking about this. But when Trump took office, everyone was talking about he's destroying the liberal international order, the rules-based liberal international order. Now we can argue it's a myth anyway, but there were so many people, writers at the New Yorker, those types, that were writing about despair. They were in such despair that the United States was destroying its own liberal international order. How could this happen? This is just a catastrophe. I mean, he was talking about America first. He was talking about, they were talking about the rise of nationalism, which is exactly the opposite of this cosmopolitan sort of view of the world as a borderless place, these Davos, Switzerland types, these jet-setting, multi-billionaires who run the world, and they want a borderless world. They don't like nationalism, and they certainly don't want to hear about protectionism and America first. And this is precisely, the end of the US-led order. It's over. Like, there's no, it's like Humpty Dumpty. You can't put him back together again once he's fallen off the war. Nobody. So when Biden came to office, a lot of these people, and there could be like Thomas Wright of the Atlantic, who's a good friend of mine, they were really upset. They thought maybe Biden, I'm not saying he did, but Biden would restore, to be the glorious restoration of the liberal international order, and everyone would come to see the U.S. Remember, Biden came in saying, "We're your partner again. We're a global player. We're just who you used to know." But they're all like, "No, you're not," because once there's a Trump, once there's somebody that comes to office saying, "I don't care about my allies. I don't care about NATO. I don't, it's me first." Then you can't go back to this idea of do what's in others' interest because it's in your own interest to do it, this kind of thinking. You even see this with bristling about, and I think it's quite justified, about Ukraine. So, we've given $120 million to Ukraine. We could do a lot with that money. How now? 120 billion. Am I saying million? Yeah. I just want to make sure that I'm right here.
We have a debt problem that's increasing. Exactly. I think 32 trillion at this point. Yeah. And it's significantly rising, and that's a big issue that we have.
So you see this whole Trump, it's 130 billion. This whole Trump thing is really tied. You might think, well, it's kind of like besides the point. No, it's right on the point. Trump happened because we had given up. Many Americans had given up on an international order, any international order, not an American-led international order, which some call American hegemony or liberal hegemony. This view that the U.S. runs a rule-based liberal international order, which is what the end of history is supposed to have given us, right? But you see, we have the return of great power politics, China's rise, America after the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. We were like, hey, we can't be funding the rest of the world. It's us or them. It got like that. And what are we doing in NATO anyway? They're rich. This is welfare for the rich. Why are we doing this? All good questions. I happen to agree with that as a realist. I think cosmopolitan thinking, all this, that's fine when you're fighting a Cold War. But, how is it in U.S. interest to support Europe? They're rich. It's welfare for the rich. Why are we sending $130 billion to Ukraine? Why can't the Europeans defend themselves? Why can't, Russia has a GDP of like Spain. Why is the U.S. Why do they throw U.S. taxpayer money around like that? Your money, my money. How can they get away with that? How is Ukraine's border our problem? I mean, and how can they, with a straight face, claim that this is a U.S. national security problem? They won't defend their own border, but they say their border is important. So Americans are like, they don't buy this anymore. They're not buying America as the beneficent or the benign hegemon that provides collective goods to the rest of the world in terms of security and open markets. And hey, if you want to trade with us, our market's always open to you as a distressed market. Do whatever you want, but you can close your, Trump was like, no, we're playing power politics here. It's us versus them. And that goes for our allies too. Now you might say, I'm not saying you should agree with it. You don't have to agree with it, but it certainly seems congruent with what I'm telling you, the story I'm telling you.
Absolutely.
That is that, the world is becoming more disordered, and the American order is being undermined, not just by China and those revisionist rising powers like Russia, China, whatever, Iran, things, but by Americans themselves.
Yes.
We don't want it anymore. We no longer think that American power, is a tool for good in the world. And after Afghanistan and Iraq, you can understand that Americans are just tired of it. They just don't see what's in it for them.
Exactly right.
Managing the world. What's in it for them? But if the US isn't going to manage the world, who's going to do it? Not China.
No. And well said. There's so many echo chambers, groupthink, filter bubbles nowadays, and that's exactly what we talk about, this whole shared ideology, this new truthiness that you refer in your book, which I love. Once again, I'm going to show this. I flashed the great book here that started it all. That's how I met Randy. I just love this book. And you talk about the infosphere and right on. And you mentioned it a decade ago. And you foretold all that has occurred, and it's only occurred more so. So value your realism. Thank you so much for pointing those excellent points out. I want to talk about you mentioned revisionist states. So, and I love the interconnectedness. We're going to get into Sino-American, the China, and all the other multiplayers that you've mentioned. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the main differences between the status quo and revisionist states, like you mentioned, and how they affect the current balance of power in the world.
Yeah. Well, a revisionist state is one that covets things more than it wants to protect what it already has. That's a simple way of thinking about it. It wants some major change, either in its immediate neighborhood or its status, or in the world. So a revisionist power is a power that covets and wants to undermine the status quo or the established order. And then there are the status quo states that are, want to maintain the established order. Today, I would think there are really no status quo states in some sense, and no pure revisionists, which is, it's kind of strange because I don't see China as a revisionist, with a capital R, like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. I don't see them at all. So I got to say, not to ask this question, it relates to me in a sense that I don't believe, you keep hearing we're in another Cold War. It's almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because this is the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats can agree about, is that China is an enemy and it's like a new Cold War. We've got to do whatever. And I just don't see it. I see China is a rising power, and it's got a lot of problems. I mean, I don't think it has a future. Maybe it does, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if China was on the downside of its trajectory already. But I don't see it as major revisionist. It wants more prestige. It has prestige demands. It wants to create, its Belt and Road Initiative. It would like to create a new Silk Road. It wants to get, a growing power. It's like a furnace, like a fire. It needs wood, it needs, energy. Like China is a growing economy. It needs secure resource, access to raw materials and, markets and things like that. So it's understandable that they would want a blue water navy. They would want the Belt and Road Initiative. They want to build infrastructure and get access to raw materials. It's also a way of sending Chinese out for welfare. They can go work, and it's been terrible for them actually as a, it's not really that threatening. They're very clunky imperialists, they're very bad at, they're learned, but what they did in Africa and in Asia, they've just made a lot of enemies. So anyway.
Yeah. So
Um,
let's
China,
go into China. I'd like you to tell us more about China, how it's not like the Cold War. A lot
right,
of
it's
people,
not like the
it's
Soviet
not.
Union. So like when you hear that we're in a new Cold War, it's a new bipolar system,
No.
or you even hear, I always hear Russia thrown in with China and America. The first thing I want to say is I'm shocked that people would talk about Russia in the same sentence with China and the United States. It's a small GDP. It's just a troublemaker, but it doesn't make it a superpower. It has no global influence. It's just, all right, it can cause trouble in its neighborhood. It didn't want Ukraine in NATO. I get it. All right, we got a problem. Putin's a little dictator. Okay, I get it. But I mean, they're not on the same level as China and the United States. They have no economy. Without an economy, you can't be a superpower today. You can't do anything. But China, look, China's nothing like the Soviet Union in the sense that it's completely plugged into the liberal international or the trading system that we have. China doesn't want to overthrow the system. What would a Chinese international system look like? I mean, by definition, they're the rising power. They're doing better than everybody, right? If you're rising, you're doing relatively better than the ones that are falling. Though I don't think they're rising anymore, but that has to do with Xi Jinping and his dogmatic, communist views. He's like killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, but okay. But anyway, so China's revisionist, but in a small way. They want more influence in their region. They want to dominate their region. They want prestige. They want things like that. That Taiwan could be an issue, and that's a whole another issue there. Would the U.S. go to war over Taiwan? I hope not. But anyway, I don't think we would, but I hope not. But you hear people talking about like the Cold War. They're not the Soviet Union. We do more trade with China than anyone else in the world. China does more trade with us. Japan, they all do trade. They trade more than anyone. The Soviet Union, nobody traded with the Soviet Union. China doesn't have any ideology they're exporting. They're not doing, they're just economic competitors of the US. Not very good ones either. And when you think, I mean, they're good, but I mean, we're not dependent on China in any extensive way, although you could disagree. I mean, like they make ventilators, they make things that we can substitute. We should be less dependent on them than we are. I would say that. But, with global supply chains, sure, after the pandemic, there's not as much of that. There's been a pullback. There's been more attention paid to supply chains and things like that. Okay. But this is not the Soviet Union. No. This is not another Cold War. In the Cold, you don't trade, your number one enemy is not your number one trading partner. Now, we talk about them like they're number one enemy, but they're not coming to get the United States. And it's nothing like this. Here's the key point, why it's nothing like the Cold War. And if I do nothing else in this talk, I hope your viewers come away not thinking about this as a Cold War. The Soviet Union threatened to take over Western Europe. They had a conventional military advantage in Europe, and there was a goal line stand. Like there was the possibility that the Soviet Union could take over the Eurasian landmass, which is the geographic pivot of the world, supposedly, according to McKenna. China cannot do that. They're in no position to take over Eurasia. They are hemmed in by India, even Russia. Russia's not, they're friends, for a little while, right? India and China share a long, long border, and they have skirmishes all the time. Japan, they're hemmed in by Japan, Russia, India, Korea. They're not going anywhere. Like they cannot extend. They could never take over the Eurasian landmass. And so the question really is not like, is this like the Cold War? It's nothing like the Cold War. There are trading partners, and they're hemmed in. They're not taking over any large geographic space. The only thing is that we have to decide is if we want to contain China or not. Should we do that? And if we want, and I don't honestly understand why we want a containment strategy like we had in the Cold War, because I really don't see them. What's the big deal? I know a lot of my realist friends, like Meerschaum, will come after me. This is where we disagree, but I think I'm being very realist here, actually. I still think the question is, should America retrench to the point where we let Japan and our other allies in Asia, let them do the major balancing against China. Like, let them build up their militaries, let them contain China if they're going to contain China. It's their region, right? Well, we're a Pacific power. There's no doubt. I'm not claiming that we aren't. But today, the United States should retrench from Europe. We're not a European power. They're rich. They don't have any enemies. We're done protecting them. They can do it on their own. That is welfare for the rich. What are we doing in the Middle East? Nothing constructive. We can probably get out of there, though people say, well, the Persian Gulf, okay, that's a vital interest. I don't know. I think we can retrench. But the question is, in Asia, should we redirect our forces like Obama wanted to, redirect America's focus towards the rebalance to Asia? Or should we let the frontline allies like Japan and Korea and them, let them take the brunt? We'll be offshore, over the horizon with our forces. Should we, in other words, should we pull back our forces over the horizon? That's the real question. I don't know. I'm like undecided, like over the horizon. Okay, the only problem is that it's difficult. Do we want Japan arming? Would this create more trouble than it's worth? Like, this gets back to, I said I would return to China. Do they really want us out of East Asia? I don't know. Like, I don't think so, because we're like a pacifier, just like we were in Europe with France and Germany. After 2 world wars, they didn't want us leaving. We wanted to leave. We wanted to create a force, a European force. But France couldn't trust Germany, and they needed the US as a pacifier to grab everyone by the neck and impose an imperial peace. China kind of wants that too. They don't want Japan on its own, building up its army and defenses. They've seen that story before, it doesn't end well. It's like Japan, it's like a drinker. If Japan is socially drinking, that's okay. But if they start drinking alone, then you got to worry. And that's what they're thinking about with Japan's military. It's fine if they build up some of their forces with the US, but if the US leaves, we don't want them. And it's the same. So you might get a security, this is what we call security dilemma, that arms racing, because one state's security, as I said earlier, one state's increase in security necessarily decreases their neighbor's security. So you'll get an arms race and a ratcheting up of hostilities in Asia. So if the US leaves, is that really what do we really want that? Or maybe the status quo, the devil is better than the devil you don't know. Like, we might save a little money, sure, we might do, but in the end, we might have to come back and things will be even worse. Yes. So I think the question is, what I'm getting at is, we don't have this liberal international order we're defending, like the liberal hegemony grand strategy after the Soviet Union collapsed. For like 30 years, it was just the US is going to run the world, we're going to manage the world, we're going to promote democracy, civil rights, we're going to human rights, we're going to do it all. It's going to be the American vision, we're going to impose that on the Middle East. Look how that worked, right? We're going to do all these things. But then when it ended, so now it's like, well, what will take its place? And the question is, I think we should be talking more about global retrenchment, but then it's how much retrenchment? And, how do you wean the rest of the world off of American power? That's the key. And, I don't know. I mean, I can see unintended consequences. Like, everything is okay. Maybe we should just leave it alone.
Exactly.
And so the end of the story, to wrap the story up, is just that, so, all right, the world is not going to be ordered. It's going to be a disorderly world. There's not going to be any hegemon telling everyone what to do, grabbing everyone by the neck, doing all this stuff. That world is over. It's like we live in a messy, complicated world of ad hoc coalitions and, just that kind of messy world.
Yeah, the only certainty is uncertainty, it seems.
Uncertainty, randomness, you're going to get that. But that's okay. We'll have to live with it. We like order, but better to have some disorder than to have, a global war over who's going to run the world. We don't need that. And then just one thing, because you mentioned micro processes, like you were talking about entropy.
Yes, I want to talk about the macro and the micro. Absolutely.
Just one thing I did predict that I'm kind of proud of is that I was talking at the time about how the information age, and my gosh, what a difference in just 30 years. I didn't even have a computer 30 years ago. I mean, there were, nobody was really on the internet that much. We talk about creating your own personal world,
Yes.
your own personal views. You see, I knew that this would create polarization. And really, this is the story. This is the real security threat. This is the real story that I think is entropy, because there's information entropy, which is when you have information overload. So you think about information entropy as like the noise to signal ratio. When there's too much noise in the atmosphere, you don't know what's going on. It's just so much like information. There's so much flow of information. You can believe anything that's opposite. You can support anything that's opposite with the kind of information. Like huge piles of information does not equate to knowledge. Like it doesn't mean you're going to be more knowledgeable. It just means there's more information to choose from. What it's created, and what I thought it would create, is polarization in our politics. Because the average person says, people are saying everything that's opposite is true. I don't know what to believe. I can't adjudicate the facts. I don't know. I have to live my life, right? And when you have all this megasphere of channels, millions of channels you can go to get your information, everything, what do? You get the loudest, most heated voices are the ones that are going to be listened to, and the people in the middle, the light gets drowned out by the heat, right? And so you just, all you're going to get is everyone in the middle drops out. They say, I just can't adjudicate, I don't know. And the only thing left are the polarized, the loudest, most radical, extreme voices, and they don't want to get along, and they make it like a lifestyle to just disagree with the other side. And so that's what we have in our politics. We just have, hatred and I can't even believe the world we live in these days. It's frightening to think that it could get worse than this. Like it's like there is no longer like political differences. You're either a friend or an enemy today. And this is precisely because of social media, information age. It's a big, huge experiment. And I just think it's very, very dangerous. And this is about, so entropy means like, you cannot adjudicate the facts. This is truthiness. This is what I talk about, truthiness.
Exactly. You called it in your book. I love that, truthiness.
It feels
10 years
good.
ago. Yeah.
It feels good, like whatever feels good, you can believe, and who's to say you're wrong, and then you start making everything, you get very dogmatic.
I have a quote from that book. I want to read it because I actually wrote it down here because I wanted to bring this up and have everyone know, because this is an awesome book. 10 years ago, now you're on 10 years, and you called everything. I thought you wrote it right now. That's how much it's so relevant. And it's like this, you call it the infosphere and the rise of social media and the rising entropy at this micro level. And it's information entropy. And I love talking about that. You actually mentioned Herb Simon in your book about how we have a wealth of information, but a poverty of attention. We're bombarded with information. We're in information overload. We have to get really good at deciphering what's noise and what's not, because eventually everything becomes noise. And there's also opaqueness. We don't know everything that's out there, and we don't even know what we're missing. So this is what you wrote, and this is so funny. I love it. Excellent writing. With so many contradictory facts, truths, and informed opinions being hurled at the public like free food on a cruise ship, people everywhere can essentially select and interpret facts in ways that accord with their own personal idiosyncratic and often flat out wrong version of reality. Knowledge no longer rests on objective information, but rather seductive, true enough facts. A truth poked with holes, but one that is true enough will nonetheless hold sway over those who choose to believe it because it just feels right.
Right. Exactly.
That's
Much easier
exactly
to
right.
write than speak, I will say.
That was well written. It's
Thank you.
confirmation bias written all over it. You know, people are just wanting to believe what they want to believe, and
Yeah.
they create their own worlds. And it's I can imagine how many different views we have out there. People living in their own world.
And
So
they're impervious to facts. That's the thing. And I don't even know, I hate to say facts because I don't want to feed into this disinformation
yes.
movement, because I don't believe in that either. I believe in a marketplace of ideas. But yeah, it's just, yeah.
It's
It
just
gets
gotten
to
more this way, and I guess we just have to embrace this chaos and
uh
randomness and just accept it.
I
And
can't accept the polarization though. I really, I can embrace the chaos and the randomness, unpredictability,
mhm,
disorder, but wow,
the
when it
polar,
gets down
I
to
know,
polarization, I
the
mean, we gotta
polarization.
love each other,
Exactly.
we gotta understand that, we're
Be
all,
kind and
together.
yeah, and we need to
We
be
got
kind, and people can be so mean online because they have masks they wear. There's
exactly
no, you dehumanize each other.
anonymity.
The anonymity
That's another
and
part of the book. Like, these new forms of virtual reality create like just a terrible anonymity where people are just dreadful to each other.
it's terrible. I know, and we see that. And what I want to go into is its polarity. We keep talking about it, and you talk about the multiplayers, and there's differences between the multipolarity. There's bipolarity, which
yeah.
we experienced post 1945 when we were in the Cold War until 91, and then people say we're in unipolarity, we're in a non-polarity. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts?
Well,
What state?
I just wrote a paper on this actually,
Wonderful.
published soon, but it's on, this is 13 years later. I started actually in 2009 with that book, or that article. So it's many years later,
Ooh.
14 years later. So, I call it unbalanced bipolarity, which is like, the term is like, we have two superpowers, if you want to call it, China and the United States, but the US is much stronger than China. So it's what I call unbalanced bipolarity. So like, there definitely are, China and the US are very much way above the rest of the world in terms of their capabilities. Although, Japan would be third. I would put Japan third. But the US is so much stronger than China. We have to understand that we can't dominate, we can't do anything, but we're not, China is not an existential threat to the United States. And it's not even in terms of economics, I think we have a lot more to gain by cooperating with China than we do. All right, we don't need to trade strategic goods with them. Okay, I get it. And we don't want them, our telecommunication system, Huawei, whatever. We don't want them, running our thing. I get that. That's just realism. That's just paranoia, understanding that, the world, being pessimistic and dark, because you never know, intentions can change. You don't want to be vulnerable, so I get that, but I don't think that the world is Cold War bipolarity like the Soviet Union, because the Chinese just don't present that kind of threat. And I'm really worried it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have something cool though to show you about the
I'd love
book
to
if you
see
want to
it.
talk about it.
I would love it. Now,
Okay, it's
I
just for the viewers who haven't read the book, I'd like
great.
to try
You
to
can
show
share.
them.
Yeah, perfect.
I
And
like to show them something. It's just a funny like thing I usually end
awesome.
a talk on.
This is so awesome, Professor. I love this. Now,
Okay,
I think our competition with China is more geo-economic than it is military ideological.
absolutely, absolutely, and that is it. It's a geo-economic competition. And so let me say, the title of the book is kind of funny, Maxwell's Demon and the Golden Apple, because it would sound like,
And Maxwell Demon is big data. Exactly
right,
right.
and Maxwell's Demon, let me
I
slide
love that.
from let's see, slideshows. It should be from this. Oh, is it showing that? Okay. Uh
Information. I'd love to know your
yeah.
take on algorithms, AI,
Are you
blockchain.
seeing the big data? You're seeing just,
Yes, I see
okay,
it.
okay. So um yeah, I just don't want you to see the oh, there we go. Okay. from current slide. Okay, great. Okay,
Cool.
so Maxwell's demon in the title is actually the sorter. The solution to rising disorder in a in terms of like thermodynamics is sorting molecules. Remember I was saying the green you get from blue and yellow, the molecules get together. Now, if there were some nimble sorter, we call it a demon. In the 19th century, demons were used for thought experiments. They weren't evil. They were just, okay, something that's superhuman could do something. So a superhuman sorter was Maxwell's demon. He would sort the molecules, the fast ones from the slow ones, and that way a closed system wouldn't have rising entropy. It would actually be ordered. But there is no nimble fingered demon that could sort molecules going at different speeds. So but sorting is the key to rising entropy. Okay, so game theory, as you know, as an economist, right? I'm going to talk about a different kind of game theory, not the type of game theory that's like trees and
I love game theory.
The old Rand theory, Rand Corporation game theory, Morgenstern, whatever. So it's like a social theory of games. So I know this is it's not scientific. I'm just saying, I just ran across this when I was writing the book, and I thought it was really kind of cool.
Games reflect the societies and times from which they were created, right?
Exactly. So it's like what were the popular games at the time? So during the Great Depression, Monopoly was the most popular game because
being a tycoon.
we could all claim that we were, rich, and it was fun, right? During the Cold War, everyone was talking about strategy, Cold War strategy. So Risk was the most popular game at the time. So it reflects the times, right? It tells you something about the social milieu in which the games are being popular. Now, in the 60s, what game is going to be the most popular? Well, it turns out the Twister was the most popular game because they called it sex in a box, because it was free love, Twister, you have a set of party, and so it was that kind of thing. Then the most popular game of all time is Trivial Pursuit.
I love this game, actually.
Well, this is when we start to get like the information age starts to come about. But now in the game, when I say the entropy is really starting, is
I love this great game.
And it was actually a Soviet game that came with it was free when you bought Nintendo. So it became the dominant game. And to this day, the logarithm for Tetris is in Angry Birds. I've never played these games. I don't even have a cell phone, so I'm such a Luddite. But anyway,
I love that you don't have a cell phone.
No, I don't.
That's so cool. I think that's awesome.
I don't like. I just like the idea of being free of that.
I love it.
Anyway,
that's
probably crazy. But anyway, digital revolution. So Tetris. Now here's the description of it. The enemy in Tetris is not. This is from the New York Times. Actually, the enemy in Tetris is not some identifiable villain, but a faceless, ceaseless, reasonless force that threatens constantly to overwhelm you, a churning production of blocks against which your only defense is a repetitive, meaningless sorting.
So brilliant. Oh my
so
God.
That's what I'm trying to say. Like today, the world is information overload.
Yes.
The only way that we can impose orders, we have to all become like Maxwell's demons. We have to learn to sort.
Yes, sorting.
And what is
deciphering?
Big data? What is big data? It's sorting. It's like they've learned how to take all. I remember I was at a conference with the CIA actually back in like 2008, and there was this guy who looked like he crawled out. He was living in his car, and he used to work for Microsoft, and he was this genius guy, like about cyber and everything. But I don't know. He was talking like this gibberish about. Like he was saying, but it wasn't gibberish. He was just like a genius that was like a character out of a movie or something. And he was talking about this sorting, like he called it superfood. He was like, you sprinkle geospatial superfood onto data and it makes the data make sense. And this is geospatial stuff. This is exactly what these big data corporations have learned to do. Like, they know everything about you. They have files on you, gigantic files. They know your likes, your dislikes. Like, all the ads are targeted to your eyeballs specifically because they know all this stuff about you. The point is that in the information age, you leave a huge, particularly if you have a cell phone, you're leaving a huge, like, mark on the world, all kinds of things you're doing, and they've learned how to sort. Because like this, I remember when the CIA, they would talk about, oh, we can gather information, like, no problem. We're great at gathering stuff. It gets better and better, but we can't do anything with it because we don't know how to sort it. We don't know how to make sense out of it. Well, they've learned how to make sense out of it. And what is that? They've learned how to sort. They've learned how, they're like these big data corporations are like big Maxwell's demons in a world of rising entropy. They figured out like the secret to sorting so they can make sense out of things and control, you to some extent, sell you stuff. They know a lot about you, and nobody even talks about these corporations. They are so important, and you never hear them even. Now I sound like a Thomas Pynchon novel, but
no, but that's exactly right. I mean, nothing's free in this world, and Facebook, all these social media companies keep records on everyone. They know, they have profiles on everyone. Google is in the business of big data, and that's what this is all about. It's big data, and it's about how efficient you can be at sorting. And it's about innovation. And, like Snow is a great company, a good example of big data. And they have a unique way of sorting and organizing their data. And the ones that do become the leaders. And it's all about sorting through, organizing all that information, because there's so much information.
And it's power. It's power. The ability to sort information is where the power is right now.
Absolutely.
There's so much we live in an information age, and most people leave huge footprints. And so, anyway, it's just like, I just think it was interesting.
I love that.
If I'm right, that I should have just. The worst thing I've done. I like the name of the book, and I didn't call the initial article was Ennui Becomes Us, but Justine named it that. I wanted to just call it the age of entropy or the age of disorder.
I love that.
We're living in the age of disorder.
I love that
which
name.
is what I really want to call it. Then sorting becomes, and think about this. Here's a simple way, if viewers want to think about it. Like, in the old days, you had a camera and you took pictures. And then you'd have to have the pictures processed. So, film, you get 26 pictures, whatever. And you take them and you get them. And then you get the picture and you would put it in the album, and it'd be me and grandma, me and, the cat. Yeah. And you'd have the picture, it'd be physically. Now, pictures are free. You take millions of pictures, but what good are they? You can sort them a million different ways. Like, you could sort of me and the cat and grandma, me and the, so like, you're still sorting. Like, in order to make a world where you have so much information at your fingertips, and you can just, do things like we take for granted how easy the world is, right?
Yeah.
To create information, right? But what good is that if we don't sort? Do people look at pictures anymore? Do they?
No.
But do they actually?
I don't.
No.
I have thousands. I mean, I have there's little value. It's about supply and demand, right?
Right.
Well, I have so much of a supply of photos. Back in the 80s or 90s, I used to go develop my pictures once a week, and I would value those 24 or 12. They were, right?
Absolutely.
And even the ones that were blurry or that were I would still keep them.
Absolutely.
Now, I swear, Randy, I have thousands that I don't even look through, and I'm just like, I don't even want to bother with it. It's too much. And there's just
that's so true. I swear, I'm like a lot of people. I don't even have pictures of myself from like 8 to like 19. There's not a single picture of me. There might be one picture in a school album somewhere. It's like, in the old days, nobody took no moving footage. There are whole parts of your life that are just gone. So like when you say those individual pictures are valuable, they certainly are.
And now
they're irreplaceable.
And now there's just too much. I don't even sort through it. I need something to help me sort. And I had this, Google has a great face recognition. So you can actually like find all the pictures of yourself or your son or your someone. And I still don't really use it. But it's just because there's just too much. And I don't know what to do with it. And it's just,
well, we're all just like, sorters, or we have all this information in the world. We're just trying to get through it. Well, like we're trying to make sense out of a very complex world, and where there's just so much coming at you, and a lot of it you just turn off. It is the truth.
We're in a world of declining productivity across the board, and and that's why we're birthing these new industries, AI. And at the same time, it can be very scary, but the blockchain is decentralized blockchains. And so it's almost like we're creating this reality where we need these technologies to help us with our lives, because it's become a disordered mess. And I need like an AI assistant just to help me sort through my emails.
Well,
right?
That is the truth. It just consumes you. It consumes
does. I agree.
I'd much rather just look around and still
I love that.
Well,
we love that about you. Randy, you're awesome. I love that. That's so cool. So, and I love your analogies with games, and so brilliant how it's the generation of when they're born, when they're creative, reflects the time period. And I never played Angry Birds or any of that. I really, not really into all of that, but I love Tetris. And that was like having to do with breaking down the Berlin Wall. But I love the concept that you said, how we knew our enemy in Risk, in Monopoly. It was always that, that wealthy tycoon, that. And, but we don't know our enemy now. It's like Tetris. It's like this mysterious force that's
complexity,
right?
It's just complexity.
It just keeps going faster and faster and faster, right? And it's just.
And I also I think well, I do think individuals have more. In some ways, they can like exert more influence over the world. One individual could
more empowered.
But I also I think that it's a thought experiment. Like imagine that you were transported back to medieval times, and you were among these monks or whatever. You were in some monastery, and you were trying to explain the world you came from. You'd say, "Well, we had this thing called the internet," and they say, "Yeah, how'd that work? I don't know." "Oh, we had these things, television. How did that work? I don't know. We had these things like planes, airplanes. How'd that work? I don't know. Radios. I don't know." Like nothing. It's like most people, and I'm not saying everyone, but the world is so much more complicated these days that people just understand it. Like they don't know how much most of the world is a mystery to them. Most of the things they do every day that they use, they don't know how it works. They have no idea. They just know how to interface with it. Okay, but it's like a world that is unknowable. We've gotten used to like being in environments where they're just completely unknowable. I don't know how things work. I could not explain to anybody the world that I live in, but I know how to live in it, So I think that's, what does that do? It's like kind of like a sort of alienation from your environment. That I don't, so like, is the quality of life in this new like information age, interdependent, globalized, is the quality of life better? I don't know. I really don't think so. I don't. I think if you ask like somebody from the 19th century walking in a field somewhere in Scotland, I don't know. Would you rather be listening to a boombox in 1980 or your cell phone in 2030? Would that be a better quality of life? I wouldn't trade what's behind door number 2.
It's like
are we happier after all this? Like that's kind of like an underlying theme of the book. It's like growing complexity leads to sort of information entropy and a sort of alienation.
Depression, isolation.
Flatness of the world. Like, and I mean flatness in a sense of, in the book I talk about like when you're listening to something that's very slow, like minimal. I once went to Philip Glass Einstein on the Beach. It's like 12 hours long, and it's very. If you've never seen it, I was sitting next to actually Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, and
Ooh,
yeah, I don't know. We were at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and it
so
was just taking
cool.
place at such a slow pace that you thought nothing was happening, but after a half an hour, somebody's hand moved or something. Like, they were moving, but it was so slow that you were just bored. So it was the repetition and the lack of variety that kind of makes your mind go dead. But when you have information coming at you like in a cacophonous way, the same thing happens. You get information overload load and boredom. And so it's like when you think of like, I think Bartok or Schoenberg, where you listen to something and it's just cacophonous. You can't find a theme. It's just sounds like noise to you. Again, you get bored, just as if like something's happening at a very slow pace, you get bored. And just that's kind of like the world today. It's like information overload leads to a certain, that's entropy, that's information entropy. It
Yes.
causes a sort of boredom, shutting down.
Yeah,
People
you
are
shut
shutting
down. Yes, the
I think they
paradox of
are.
choice. Yeah, Paradox of Choice was a great book that I read this many years ago. I think 2007, I don't know, 2004, whenever. Barry Schwartz, he's a professor at a college in PA. Schwartz, I don't know, I forgot the name of the college, but he wrote a great book, Paradox of Choice, and just says that too many choices,
Yes.
and we shut down. And we don't want to make the choice. So we actually, and there's a distinction between being a satisficer and a maximizer.
Yeah.
And sometimes good is good enough.
Satisficing, yeah.
Right.
We like satisfaction. Well, it's actually rational too, because too much of a search is too much energy put into a search isn't worth it.
It's not worth it.
It isn't worth it. It's funny, East Europeans and Soviets, when they would come to the United States or the West, when they emigrate, they couldn't stand the lot. Like they go to a grocery store or something, or department store, and there'd be so much choice, they would start to get like sick because
you get anxious.
Too much for them.
Yeah,
you
get anxious. Yeah, you get anxious, and you just shut down. You don't want to make all those choices. So it's like you don't want to decide. So it's less is more. So I think maybe we at some point go back to some state of less. I think people are going to probably make choices to give up all this information bombardment. There was an article, and I don't know if New York Times, one of these papers, it said that how some kids are choosing the dumb phone and they're actually giving up the smartphone because this millennials, they're very smart. They know, they already see the consequences of all this information. They were born with all this information and they're saying it's too much. I need to shut it down. So maybe we go back to that state.
I hope so.
How much more can we take? We're just
I don't know.
Attention deficit. I mean, we're just like inundated now. ChatGPT, we're always able to ask questions about anything, and we're able to know anything at any time, at any moment. But
people don't know how to interact anymore because of virtual reality. They have these virtual places where they go and party, and I mean, it was so unlike the world I grew up in, and I'm so thankful I grew up in a world where people actually met each other face to face and went out. And,
do you see the kids out? Do you see the kids out nowadays? You see them all hanging out on their phones.
I know, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's a very antisocial. It's funny because social media is the opposite. It should be called antisocial media. But
I know.
I don't know. We're in a strange world now with AI. I hear people talking, even Kissinger talking about artificial intelligence as like the nuclear revolution. Like the implications are as bad as nuclear, the advent of the nuclear age, the atomic age. I don't know. I have to read up on this, but there is, I suppose, with all the caution, from everyone talking about, we can't allow this artificial intelligence age to just run amok. We can't allow it to just happen organically without any like thought and management about what does it mean in terms of our morals, our ethics, we're entering a strange new world.
It is. We
really are. And these are strange times.
It seems
that's the least you could say.
Right? And it seems that information will be the new hegemon. I mean, it's going to be AI.
If computers can do everything an engineer can do, then why did you go to engineering school? I mean, you could just give the job to anybody. It's like, this is like, there's a lot of ethical questions, and technology is getting way ahead of our ability to process in terms of ethics and morality and what quality of life. What do we want? We can't just have things on auto. This is what we might call technological determinism. We're just having a world that's going to be determined by technology rather than human beings saying this is not in our interest. What's in our interest? But then who's going to decide that?
Yeah, and it's like, I think Elon Musk came out and said, oh, we need to stop advancing the AI because it's getting dangerous. And it's like, well, all the other players are saying, why am I going to stop? Maybe he's just saying that so he can get ahead.
Exactly.
So then they're like, so then no one can stop anyone because they're like, whoever.
It's a prisoner's dilemma. Everyone's got to defend.
Right. Exactly.
That's what it is.
Exactly. The principle.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's like, when does it end? And what is the solution? And that's the question. I mean, I love how you said virtual reality offers an environment for normal people to engage in antisocial behavior. It's like an individual psychosis. And I think you said that in one of your recent.
The collective psychosis. It's like
a collective psychosis.
It's a collective psychosis. It's like these have happened in history where I once wrote about like collective nightmares where
collective nightmare.
Yeah, the whole nation suffer from them, like fears of attacks that could never happen. But
exactly. Now
I think we have a collective psychosis.
We do. I love that. I mean, I love I have to say, I agree with what you say. I love it. I love it. So refreshing to hear this. This is so right on. And
I wish everyone felt like you did.
I think you're a student in your class.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I love you talk about Trivial Pursuit in the 80s, the rise of the information age. And then we talk about Tetris and Berlin Wall. And then Angry Birds. What game would you say is of now? Is there a new game that you would say is?
I don't think there actually is. I think we're still in that sorting sort of. That's the meaningless sorting. I think we're still there. I mean, I don't know, but I have to think about it.
Think about it.
I don't know. Like I'm afraid people want to go back to the Cold War. I think it's just an easy. I've written this article with a couple other people that was in Foreign Affairs a couple of years ago about the end of grand strategy. And it kind of builds on this book about why grand strategy is now impossible. And a lot of it's for the reason this book, if the world's unpredictable and unknowable at some level, we could want to know, but we can't like put all our eggs in one basket because we don't really know what the future's going to be. So when you live in an uncertain environment like corporations, when we have fast moving technological changes and innovations, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You sort of delegate authority, you decentralize, you do things like you muddle through. I think that's kind of like US foreign policy. It's got to be like muddling through. It's not intellectually satisfying. It doesn't have like the ring of containment strategy and grand strategy, it just sounds, but that's in an unknowable, unpredictable world. What are you going to do? You're just going to muddle through. You're just going to, hedge your bets. And I think that's kind of like the game we're in now. But I don't think that this is not what leadership wants to hear. They think, and people inside the Beltway, DC, they want a grand strategy. They want a world they understand. All right, let's go back to the Cold War. We have a Cold War with China, and it doesn't make any sense. But that doesn't, self-fulfilling prophecies. That's what I think we have to worry about now. Yeah. Self-fulfilling prophecy. I really think the key is retrenchment. The US has to learn to think less about ordering the world and, trying to create a world in its own image and just start thinking about what's in its good, in the best interest of its citizens. And that doesn't mean isolation or anything like that, or back to the womb of the Western Hemisphere. It just means everything that the US government does should be in the citizens' national interest. Spending $130 billion in Ukraine does not seem to me like anyone's thinking about what's in your interest and what's in my interest. That's the thing. I'm worried that we have our leadership is not nearly as bright as the people. I have total faith in the collective wisdom of the people of the United States. I have no confidence in our leaders because they have shown time and time again that they are way behind the people. I mean, the best we can do as the United States, I don't care what party you're from. I'm just saying, like, we should have a leader who understands the world and is doing what's in our interest, thinking about, like, that's what government should do. Should always be thinking about the people that it represents, what's in their best interest, how do we improve their lives. That's the only thing government is supposed to do. It's not supposed to
public service. They're supposed to be public service for the people, not for their interests.
And they should spend your money and my money like it's our money, not their money. You know, that's the key. It's like, I don't care. You want to tax us? It's like, you know, people. My wife loves Sweden. That's great. She says, even when they were spending huge chunks of people's money, they were taxing them a lot. They don't do it as much anymore, but I'm sure it's quite high. But they give you great services. Like, if you live in Sweden, you're living a good life. Like, you see where that money is going. You know where it's going, and it's doing some good. This government has not shown that. And just throwing money away on global commitments that do nothing to make us safer and just put us on the front lines of a possible dangerous situation where, like in Korea, where we're going to go to war. We're going to be, we're going to be committed before we can even contemplate whether it makes any sense. Same with Taiwan. What's our commitment there? Do we want, we've said that Taiwan's part of China. Do we want to go to war if China does something? Do we, or we haven't really, I don't think our leaders or our foreign policy commitments have been thought through to be in accord with today's world. They were made during the Cold War. It's time to rethink American commitments.
Rethink, exactly.
We need to do it. We need to take make a new assessment and make a list and think about all the things and what do you call it, like reevaluate all of our commitments and say, do these make sense? Put everything under the microscope and say, are these in the interests of the American people in 2023? And I think people would be shocked about what the US is committed to do. They would never approve of it.
No, I agree. I think Randy Schweller for president. I think I love that.
Dog catcher. I'll take anything.
Exactly. They have to make decisions based on the best interest of the people, and they haven't been for quite some time. And I agree with you. I think we have more internal problems, and I think that's what we're more focused on. I mean, we have 32 trillion in debt. It's rising, mass government spending.
Absolutely.
And we have debasement of fiat currency is going on exponentially. And I think that, the US dollar as the global reserve currency remains because of its stability and liquidity. But it's only because the other currencies aren't really, they're no real contender. I mean,
it's the exorbitant privilege. You're right. That I always tell my class, I'm glad you said that. The key to American power is that we are the global reserve currency. People, it doesn't sound like a sexy topic, but believe me, that's good. That would change people's lives in a heartbeat, and you would see us sink like a stone. And then we'd have to really start to figure out what we want to spend our money on, because owing money to yourself is a lot easier than owing it to someone else. Being accountable. That's
right. But our interest expense is higher, and then we also are accumulating more debt. And the concern is just this fiat, debasement. And, I think that the banking crisis demonstrated all the free money and negative rates that we've had for, a long time now, 15 years plus. And then all the stimulus, all the money that was printed and created during COVID. It's all about supply and demand. And as you have increase in money supply, chasing too few of scarce, like you said, scarce goods and services, what are you going to have? You're going to have
the new economy, the new economists and with new economics are telling us there was no connection between growth and inflation, between debt and inflation. Well, no. And now we're finding out the hard way. And it could be a 10-year slog. a slugfest.
They're trying to
I
blame the
feel
war.
really terrible.
Yeah, they're saying it's the war, it's the supply chain, it's
Uh,
demand push, it's all that. It's like,
it's
no,
all,
it's actually the increase in the money supply directly affects inflation.
of
And
course.
and we know that. And
Yeah.
so at this point, it's very challenging times that we have. We have embedded, entrenched inflation. We're about core rising month over month. We're high fours with core inflation CPI, and that's significant. And PCE with core, which is what the Fed looks at, is very high. It's right up there as well. And we're still rising month over month. So we have entrenchment, margins are compressed in corporate America. Prices are elevated and demand starting to come down. The consumer's not doing well. And, so
Well,
these
corporate
are,
America is not going to do any capex spending if they, with these interest rates. And
no,
I mean,
exactly.
interest,
The growth is slowing.
and China is not going to get us out of this debt problem. And they're
No,
not going to get us, they're so in debt. They have worse debt than we do.
exactly.
And they're not going to be like the engine of growth like they were to get us out of the financial crisis in 2007 and 8. So you don't have China anymore to rely on like that. And so, I mean, we're going to have some hard times, and we're going to have to learn some lessons. And I know this, just to make a topical, this recent, debt thing. I mean, cynically, it's very political. I don't know what the Republicans have been thinking about for the last 20 years, but they have not been thinking about the deficit. And they're supposed to. They're supposed to be fiscal conservatives, but they just didn't seem to see that. And then you have, people like, the neoconservatives, Lindsey Graham, he said, oh, he never met a communist, the Chinese, we got to defend against them, we got to do something with Ukraine and beat up on Russia, I don't know, this government just is not, it does not seem to understand fiscal responsibility. And the debt is the ticking time bomb. I know
exactly. That's my concern as well, is this mass spending that's not ending. It's increasing.
Your poor kids, because when they grow up, they're going to feel it. There is no doubt. Like, these projections about the deficit are truly horrendous. And the burden on like your kids is going to be just enormous. There is no getting out of it. We have got to start making the, our means adjust them with our ends, because if we don't, our checks are going to start to bounce. It's just that simple. And that's what I'm saying, that we need an overhaul. We need an inventory. We've got to take inventory of everything we're doing. Let's just say in terms of, I'm not saying that this is the main problem, but in our foreign policy, we have to take an inventory and see if these commitments make any sense anymore. Because we have to tighten our belt. We cannot we cannot be everything for everybody anymore. And we cannot be like the beneficent hegemon that, gives everybody,
because we're not taking care of our internal issues. I mean, we have, the private sector is getting hurt, and the government keeps spending, and then it's affecting Main Street
and AI, and then you have the threat of AI throwing a lot of people out of work, because that, trust me, like the job, I'm not saying there won't be new jobs, there will be new jobs created, but there's a lot of people that are going to be out of work.
And there's
AI is going to throw people out of work. The white collar class, they're in trouble. It's not just, the first industrial revolution, it was basically like amplifying physical abilities, like tractors. So it was like adding muscle. Machines were adding muscle to human beings. And that's okay. You move earth, you make railroads, you build buildings. But this is the brain power industrial revolution, and this is going to put white collar people out of work. And it's a very dangerous.
I like that analogy to industrial revolution, because I agree. I think this is not like a .com. I think AI is actually elevating. It's like, some people say it's like the invention of electricity. It's really a new level. And it's here to stay, and it's actually deflationary. With technology overall is deflationary, because it makes things, more cost, lowers cost.
So
labor. Yes. So we're
Yeah.
able to, and we need some increase in productivity. We've been on a decline for quite some
Yeah.
time, and there's margins to compress, higher cost of goods and services, higher cost of debt and capital. We have higher operating expenses, and these prices are just really not coming down. And the productivity has been hit. So we do need automation. So there's a need for all this. And so this is a much needed technology, but at the same time, it's also scary and it's creating fear. And there's a lot of jobs that are at cost. I know they'll bring in new jobs, but there's going to be change going on. So I think there's something. So we're going to have something going on. What do you predict, Randy? What's coming next? Anything? What do you
I'm done
foresee?
predicting. Told you it's an unpredictable world, randomness. Anything can happen. Anything and its
Anything.
opposite.
No.
That's you just gotta prepare. We don't know the future. We don't know what's coming. We do know that it's, trying to predict the future is like trying to paint a moving train. We just,
Exactly.
no.
Lots of moving parts, constantly moving and changing their outcomes. So you
And
have like trees and they're constantly different in chess. You have different outcomes based upon different movements, and anything is possible.
yeah.
I want to talk about the macro level though, because that's awesome about the multiplayers. And besides China, what do you think about Brazil, Turkey, India? They're talking about India being the next big growth that's coming. What are your thoughts about those players
The
in the
CIA
world?
likes India because it's the worker to retiree ratio is very good. And they're all about demographics. But the problem with India is, see, they're not an old country. We're not an old country. Japan is very old. Russia is very old. China is very old.
Ooh,
Because of
yeah.
the one-child policy, they're very old. Um, they're getting older. It's going to be terrible. But India only has like 2 major cities. It's just too much. At a certain point, population's good, but at a certain point, it's just bad. Too much population, it's too many mouths to feed. And I just don't see, it's a lumpy, it's not a very well integrated economy, domestic economy, and I don't see. I hope India is a next superpower, and I'm not underestimating them. I don't think they're a juggernaut. I think they have a lot of work to do. They also have, their government is terrible, and India. Do you know there are far more languages spoken in India than there are in all of Europe? And we don't seem to recognize that India is really, what do you call it? It's an archipelago, can't think of the word, but very diverse, ethnically and linguistically and religious, very heterogeneous, a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of trouble bringing them all together, pulling in the same direction. And it's just a lot of poverty, income inequality. And this is the problem in the world, but it has nothing to do with entropy in my book. But if we really were going to talk about, another major problem besides political polarization, and this is related, I think, is this income inequality. It's heading ahead. You can already see it, like in the US. And I think there's a global conspiracy among the elites who have all the money. There's so much. I don't want to sound like Bernie Sanders because I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan, but I am. But I'm not like innocent or naive to think that, like, look, there's so much concentration.
You're a realist, that's why.
That's right. And there's wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. They control everything. So what do you do when you have so much money and it's such a ridiculous inequality of wealth? And what do you do? Like, again, what I saw is the Trump backlash, the nationalism. You saw it all around the world. Populism, the rise of populism. It was directly a backlash against this cosmopolitanism, this globalization. It didn't care at all about how workers were affected or their lives. All it cared about, the Chinese middle class is rising. How does that help the United States middle class? We don't care. We want to create our own middle class. Now, if helping the Chinese middle class, that's fine. But what I see in my lifetime, what I see today is tremendous inequality in income. Like we're back to the 19th century again. We're like, you know, and it's getting worse. Like you see the cost with inflation, just putting gas in your tank, it's $60, you know, to fill your tank, $70 to fill your tank with gas. Meat is almost impossible to buy for working class people. They can't afford to put, you know, beef on the table. It's crazy. This is where you know, when the people are going to rise up, they cannot take this much inequality. We can't let this global system run on autopilot. There has to be, I don't know what, we have to think about the quality of life. And I'm not talking about income redistribution. I don't want that. But I'm saying like AI and all this coming thing is going to force us to think about how are we going to navigate the future so that we have citizens who live a decent life and can pass on a decent life to their kids, you know, and that is not a simple, that is a difficult thread, you know, needle to thread, you know. I think it's going to take a lot of leadership and a lot of thinking, and there's where I think we're at a deficit. We need better leaders, something efficient. We want everyone to do well.
You know, the disparity of wealth, and that's a huge one. And it's just, you know, there's books written about serfdom and return to serfdom, and they talk about how it's just going to keep getting worse. And with this inflation we have, higher prices, it's very, very concerning. So
it is very concerning, because I'm sure you're doing quite well, and I'm doing quite well, but most people I meet, they're not. And when students, I worry about them, because it's a very difficult world for them. And this younger generation really understands the debt that's going to be poured up, they're putting on them. And they understand that there won't be Social Security for them, or there won't be the things that we had. And they won't be able to buy a house, and they won't be able to buy, you know, to get the credit that
we need to think different. And, you know, I think what's happening is it's also changing their wants and needs. And if you notice, the younger generation doesn't want the big house anymore. You know, I'm a product of like, you know, 80s, 90s, and, you know, we wanted the big house. You know how Long Island is. And it's like the younger generation, they want to live in the tiny houses and like the small places.
I think they've accepted it. Maybe that's a little, I don't think anybody wants they don't want a worse standard of living than their parents.
But they want experiences. And
that's true. You know, well, you know, I'm from that hippie generation of the 60s and 70s, and I think there was a lot of good there. When the pie's growing, everyone, all right, you know, good. We'll live in a material world. We'll be silent. They're seeing it's not adding up anymore. And so they're going back to what the world needs is a little more spirituality, a little more understanding of our place in the universe. And like I said, going back to that 19th century little boy who's running through the fields of Scotland, is he better off than the kid living today with his cell phone? Maybe, because he might have more of a connection with his nature and his surroundings, and understand his place in the universe, and have an idea of, you know, the harmony of the world and the universe, than people today.
About what's really important, what really matters in life. It's a simplicity. It's the little simple things in life, the pure joys and happiness and experiences, and the beautiful sunsets and sunrises. And that's what matters. And that's where we need to find beauty and connection with people, you know, getting together and spending time together, talking. And like this discussion we just had for, I think, over 2 hours has been so enlightening. Such a true pleasure. And I love this. I mean, you're awesome. Your students are so lucky at Ohio State to have you as a teacher.
Well, I'm going to have you as a spokesperson.
I love it. Well, we have to stay in touch. But, you know, Randy, I want to know what's next for you. What books do you? I know you talk about the Descent.
I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book called, what is it called? I can't even remember right now. It's,
is about the Descent.
Yeah, it is. It's the Age of Descent. Yeah, something like that. It's I I can't remember the name. I mean, I've written, I put it down. I've actually put it down for 6 months because I wrote 470 pages, and then I thought,
Wow. That's a lot.
let's just look at, and I came. Oh, it's called, actually, yeah, you'll appreciate Broken Cycle. Something
Ooh,
about
I like that because we live.
order in an orderless world.
I love that. That is
Order in
such
an
a
orderless world.
cool. That's a cool
Yeah.
title.
So I'm thinking about it. It's very complicated, but I'm sort of thinking through these. It's almost like I am getting another bite of the apple, and I'm thinking, what did I not say, and how did I not say things in a way that I think I could make more clear this time around.
I love that.
Not that I didn't, but I returned to the broken cycle idea because I thought that, the age of dissent was a key point that kind of got buried in the last book. It was like I buried the punchline, and in some sense, not really, but I mean, there's a new punchline. I think with China, I definitely see the end of the liberal order and a sort of age of dissent where what's dangerous is not fire but ice. It's the idea that we'll have continue what do you call conflict that continues, that's unresolved because we can't resolve it on the battlefield and we can't resolve it at the bargaining table. So we will just sort of, in the old days, if you couldn't resolve something at the bargaining table, you went to the battlefield, but we can't do that any longer because it's too costly. So we'll just have these, perpetual or simmering conflicts. Nothing terrible, but just simmering conflicts.
because
where
there's
there'll
no
be a lack of,
there's like no clear cut lines there. So it's like you're constantly going to have this struggle. It's like a non-polar world of rising entropy, and it's an unbalanced, I guess, bipolar world, or just an unbalanced. It's like it's constantly
I think
shifting.
it's stable. I think that part is. I think we'll have an unbalanced bipolar world for a while. That sounds unstable. I think it's quite stable for the reason I said. Geographically, I think China's hemmed in. It can never be a global power, but I don't think the US will ever recover the legitimacy that it lost. And I don't think the people will ever again want to take on the kind of global commitment to manage the world or pretend that we're managing the world. These forever wars, they've taken all the starch out of us, that we're done. The American people are rightly done. They want retrenchment.
They do. And at this point, with this rising debt and disparity in wealth, and I don't think we're going to be able to. We have to take care of our own. We have to take care of our domestic internal issues, which are getting worse.
Exactly.
And
we have to.
I agree completely. Oh, I've loved this discussion so much.
Thank you so much.
And it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. That was the last line of this book. And I love that. Well written, excellent. I urge everyone to check out this amazing book. And I can't wait to see the rest of your next book as well. So
thank you, Rosanna.
Randy Schweller, professor at Ohio State University. They're lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and your audience.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the feedback.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Rose Show podcast. Please visit rosannaprestia.com for more episodes. See you soon. All investment, real estate, financial, legal, and tax opinions expressed by Rosanna Prestia or on The Rose Show should not be relied upon as professional advice and are intended to be used for informational purposes only.